The air inside the UN Security Council chamber was heavy, not with heat, but with something worse, tension. Cameras rolled quietly, translators waited with poised fingers, and world leaders whispered behind their hands. At the far end of the oval table, two men sat, separated by flags, protocol, and history, yet dangerously close in principle. On the left, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, seasoned, sharp, and unflinching. On the right, Captain Ibrahim Trayor, young, deliberate, and increasingly defiant. The two had never met in person. Their nations had never been allies. But that morning, circumstances forced the world to watch them speak under the same roof. The moderator had barely finished introducing the next speaker when Netanyahu cut in. "I don't need a speech," he said coolly, his voice echoing across the marble chamber. "Let's stop pretending. This man," he gestured slightly, not even turning to Trayor, "represents nothing but chaos dressed as rebellion. He's not a leader. He's a symbol, and symbols crack under pressure." A few gasps. Some laughter from Netanyahu's delegation, but Trayor didn't flinch. Instead, he waited calm, measured, his eyes fixed on Netanyahu. When he finally stood, the room went still. No notes, no script, just Troy, one hand resting on the table, the other clutching a folder stamped with the seal of Burkina Faso. "You call me a symbol," Troy began, his voice low but clear. "Maybe I am, but I am the symbol of something your drones, your dollars, and your diplomacy couldn't destroy." Dead silence. "You've had decades," he continued. "Decades to turn my continent into your chessboard. And still here I stand. Still my people rise. Not because we want war, but because we remember everything you tried to make us forget." Netanyahu leaned back, his smirk thinning. Trayor wasn't finished. "You sit there surrounded by your alliances, your nukes, and your headlines. But I come from a place where children dig through dirt to find gold they'll never touch. And yet they still sing. They still believe. That makes me more dangerous than you'll ever understand." The moderator tried to interrupt. "Mr. President, perhaps we should." "No," Troy said, his voice firmer now. "Let him hear it." Then he turned fully to face Netanyahu for the first time. "You said I'm just a symbol. But the truth is, I'm the symbol you couldn't kill. And every time you underestimate me, that symbol grows stronger." Gasps. Silence. And somewhere in the back, a camera operator whispered, "Did we just witness history?" The corridors outside the chamber buzzed with media frenzy. Headlines were already forming. Trayor's words had pierced through diplomatic formalities like a blade, and Netanyahu knew it. But the prime minister wasn't the type to back down. Within minutes, his aides had pulled him into a private suite inside the UN complex. There, shielded from the press, Netanyahu paced in front of a wall of security screens showing live news feeds. "Who coached him?" he snapped. "No one speaks like that unless they're trained." An aide muttered, "Sir, it seems he wrote it himself." No notes, no teleprompter. Netanyahu laughed coldly. "So now we're dealing with a revolutionary who memorizes insults." But it wasn't the insult that bothered him. It was the calm. Trayor had delivered a dagger while sounding like a professor. No anger, no shouting, just facts and conviction. Across the hall, Traoré stood alone before the press. A single podium, dozens of flashing cameras. A reporter shouted, "President Troy, do you regret what you said to Prime Minister Netanyahu?" "No," he said flatly. "I regret that I had to say it at all." Another asked, "Do you think it's wise to provoke a global power?" Traoré smiled. "Is it wise to provoke the oppressed for 50 years and expect silence forever?" That quote exploded on Twitter within minutes. Back in the suite, Netanyahu's face hardened. "Enough," he muttered. "Set up a private meeting. I want to speak to him off camera." His aides hesitated. "Sir, that might be." "I said now." That evening, under tight security, an off-the-record meeting was arranged in a side room beneath the UN tower. The setting was stark. A single long table, 2 chairs, no press, no advisors. Just Trayor and Netanyahu alone. Netanyahu arrived first. He didn't sit. Trayor entered with the same composure he had on stage. He placed a leather folder on the table, looked Netanyahu in the eye, and waited. "You think you're untouchable now?" Netanyahu began, voice low but sharp. "You think you embarrass me in front of the world?" "I didn't come here for you," Traoré replied. "I came for the people who never get a microphone." Netanyahu laughed. "You think your words matter. Let me explain something. Symbols fade. Real power doesn't." Trayor nodded slowly. "And real power," he said, "is when you no longer need anyone's permission to tell the truth." Netanyahu's fists clenched subtly, but Troy saw it. And in that moment, both men realized this wasn't just a conversation. It was a declaration of war, not with weapons, but with narratives. In the quiet of that dimly lit room, the mask of diplomacy slipped. "You know what I see when I look at you?" Netanyahu asked, stepping closer to the table. "A man drunk on applause. You mistake applause for legitimacy." Trayor didn't blink. "And you mistake silence for submission." The tension was no longer theoretical. It pulsed through the air like static. The table between them suddenly felt far too small. Netanyahu leaned in, his voice lower, colder. "You've gained attention. That's all. In 6 months, the world will move on. You'll still be a minor figure from a forgotten country." Trayor held his gaze. "My country isn't forgotten. It's been silenced. And there's a difference." There was no rage in his tone. Just steel. Netanyahu, taken aback by the young leader's resolve, changed tack. "Fine. You want to play statesman? Here's a lesson. Geopolitics isn't poetry. It's pressure. We apply it, or it's applied to us. That's how it's always worked. That's how it always will." Trayor replied, "Not if we change the rules." Netanyahu narrowed his eyes. "You won't get far. You don't have the banks. You don't have the weapons. You don't even have the media." Trayor stepped forward now. "But I have something you don't," he said calmly. "I have people who believe again. People who have nothing and therefore nothing to lose. That's more dangerous than your missiles." News of the private meeting leaked within hours. No video, no transcript, but insiders hinted that it had ended with Netanyahu walking out first. That alone said enough. Western journalists scrambled to get quotes. African media, on the other hand, called it the conversation of the century. On local radio in Ouagadougou, callers wept with pride. "He stood for us," one farmer said. He didn't bow. Netanyahu's team went into damage control. Press releases framed Traor as reckless and naive, warning of rhetoric that undermines progress. But every time they attacked him, his popularity soared. Memes flooded social media. A picture of Trayor at the podium with the caption, "Not a symbol, a storm." And in Israel, something unexpected happened. Not everyone was on Netanyahu's side. Some progressive voices questioned why a prime minister would spend so much political energy attacking a young African leader. One columnist wrote, "If he's truly insignificant, why are we so afraid of what he says?" The next morning, Trayor received an invitation he hadn't expected. A closed-door roundtable at the Council on Foreign Relations in Manhattan. The guest list: global economists, think tank elites, and Western diplomats. A space not built for people like him. His advisors were skeptical. "They want to contain you," one warned. "Then let them try," Trayor replied. "I'll speak where they listen, or where they pretend to." Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was academic, sterile. Coffee cups, leather chairs, screens filled with graphs. Trayor, in his traditional dark blue boa, looked out of place by design. The moderator introduced him with a thin smile. "President Trayor has certainly made headlines. Today, perhaps he can offer some clarification." Polite laughter. Trayor took the mic, paused, then began. "Let me make this simple. Africa is not a charity case. We are not a sandbox for Western experimentation. We are the origin, and we remember what was taken." Several faces tightened. "You analyze us as if we are a problem to solve. But the problem," he continued, eyes scanning the room, "is the assumption that power must always flow in one direction, and that direction leads here." A woman from a European Development Bank interrupted, trying to reframe the conversation. "Mr. President, with respect, wouldn't it be more productive to talk about partnerships instead of blame?" Trayor turned to her, calm. "A partnership built on debt, conditions, and dependency is not a partnership. It's a leash." The room froze. Back at the UN, Netanyahu watched the footage as it aired live. "He's not just talking to us anymore," one of his aides said. "He's talking to everyone we've kept quiet for decades." Netanyahu didn't respond. His silence said everything. Behind the scenes, Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs drafted a subtle campaign: counternarratives, op-eds, diplomatic pressure. But nothing stuck. Trayor wasn't attacking nations. He was exposing structures, and that made him harder to target. In the streets of Nairobi, Dar, Johannesburg, murals appeared overnight. Trayor's face beside slogans like "We remember," "No permission needed," "Power answers to people." Back home, elders began calling him by a new nickname in Mossi, Cowpoko, the one who spoke back. 3 days after the council meeting, Traoré received a private message from a highly placed intermediary. It bore no official letterhead, no insignia, but the tone was unmistakably governmental. The message was simple. Let's talk discreetly. Jerusalem is open to back-channel dialogue. His advisors debated fiercely. It's a trap, one warned. They want to neutralize you, diplomatically or otherwise. Another said, it means they see him as a real threat. That gives us leverage. Trayor listened, then finally replied. Set the call. But we record everything. The video call was scheduled for 3 a.m. Ouagadougou time. 2 Israeli officials appeared on screen. Not Netanyahu, but close enough. The conversation began with pleasantries. Quickly, it turned strategic. We don't need to be adversaries, one official said. You're a rising figure. We can help shape your rise, in return for moderation. Define moderation, Tor asked. No more inflammatory speeches. No more talk of colonial theft. Focus on development, security. Stay away from history. Traoré smiled, cold and knowing. You want me to be quiet, but still look proud. We want you to be successful, but not destabilizing. There it was, the unspoken fear. He wasn't just a regional leader. He was becoming a narrative disruptor. When the call ended, Trayor didn't speak right away. He stared at the frozen screen, the pixelated faces of men who spoke in offers but moved in threats. They don't want peace, he finally said to his advisor. They want obedience. The next morning, he released a short video. No script, just him. Seated beneath a baobab tree, wind brushing his shoulders. I have been asked to moderate, he said. But I have seen too much silence, dressed as peace. I was not elected to be quiet. I was chosen to speak the truth, especially when it's uncomfortable. The video went viral in under an hour. Netanyahu, watching from his residence, scowled. This is no longer just about Africa, he muttered. And he was right. Across Latin America, Southeast Asia, even parts of Eastern Europe, activists, students, and writers began sharing clips of Traoré. They called him the voice from below. He wasn't asking for power. He was proving you didn't need permission to wield it. It started in Accra, then in Tunis, then Bogotá. Student assemblies began quoting Traoré in their speeches. Not just African students, but young people from forgotten corners of the world who recognized the tone of someone speaking without fear. On a university wall in São Paulo, a mural appeared overnight. It showed Traoré's silhouette, fist raised. The words underneath. Silence isn't neutral. It's permission. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's inner circle grew restless. His polling numbers, stable for months, had taken a subtle hit. Not because of Trayor directly, but because of the narrative building around him. Why is this man dominating headlines? Netanyahu demanded in a late-night meeting. He controls no military. He controls no bank. And yet here we are, reacting to every word. An aide, younger than the rest, responded carefully. Because he doesn't speak like a politician. He speaks like someone who wasn't supposed to be heard. And that resonates. Netanyahu slammed his hand on the desk. We've faced states. We've faced armies. I will not be undermined by a speech. But in the streets, the momentum was unmistakable. Burkina Faso's embassies began receiving letters, not from governments, but from citizens around the globe. One read, I'm 22. I've never heard a leader talk like you. You made me believe we're not too small to matter. Traoré didn't seek to lead a global revolution, but the vacuum was real, and people were filling it with his voice. Back home, farmers in Boileso began wearing shirts that read, Unbought, unbroken. In the marketplaces, old men repeated his UN quote like scripture. I regret that I had to say it at all. It had become more than a line. It was now a worldview. At a diplomatic dinner in Brussels, a German ambassador raised his glass and half-joked. Who knew the most dangerous leader of 2025 wouldn't carry a gun but a sentence? Everyone chuckled nervously. That same night, Netanyahu returned to his private study. He stared at a photo on his desk, a black and white shot of him shaking hands with a former African president, a man who had once promised allegiance in exchange for aid. They used to call, he muttered. Now they retweet Traoré. The Global Economic Summit in Geneva was supposed to be routine. Press releases, panels, carefully curated speeches. But the moment it was announced that both Netanyahu and Trayor would attend, the energy shifted. Security tripled. Media outlets scrambled. Analysts labeled it the most anticipated ideological clash of the decade. When the day came, the conference hall buzzed with unease. Netanyahu was scheduled to speak first. He walked to the podium with practiced composure, speaking of stability, responsibility, and the burden of mature leadership. His tone was firm, his gaze was fixed, and near the end of his speech, his voice sharpened. We must not confuse noise with vision. We must not allow those who romanticize rebellion to derail decades of real progress. Everyone knew who he meant. Polite applause followed. Then Ibrahim Trayor walked on stage. No notes. No entourage. He began not with rebuttal, but with silence. 10 seconds. Then 20. Only his eyes moved, scanning the audience. There is a kind of peace that sounds like quiet, he said. And there is a kind of quiet that smells like fear. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I was told I romanticize rebellion, he continued. But what is romantic about hunger? About forgotten villages? About children growing up knowing what a drone looks like before a stethoscope? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Trayor went on. I do not wish to destabilize the world. I wish to remind it of what it chose to forget. Backstage, Netanyahu remained stone-faced. But his fingers twitched against his chair. A Swiss journalist whispered, We're witnessing a generational reckoning. An older French official scoffed. We're witnessing theater. But a delegate from South Sudan leaned in and said softly, Sometimes theater is the only way to tell the truth they don't want to hear. That evening, clips from the summit flooded every social platform. One shot in particular went viral, Netanyahu frowning in the front row, Trayor on stage behind him, speaking with quiet fire. The caption, The Empire Speaks. The Earth Replies. 2 days after the Geneva summit, Ibrahim Trayor sat down for a rare interview with American journalist Valerie Crane, known for hard-hitting questions and no tolerance for fluff. The studio was neutral. Gray walls. Clean desk. No national flags. But the world was watching. Crane leaned forward, eyes sharp. President Trayor, let's be direct. Some say you're becoming a cult figure, not a head of state. Do you enjoy the spotlight more than the responsibility? Trayor didn't flinch. I didn't ask for the spotlight, he said. But if standing in the light reveals what others hid in the shadows, I'll stay. She pressed on. You've been accused of fueling anti-Western sentiment. Is that your goal? My goal, he said calmly, is to fuel dignity. If that threatens anyone, perhaps they should ask themselves why. Then came the question everyone waited for. Netanyahu called you a symbol. Are you? Trayor paused. A symbol only matters, he said slowly, if it survives fire. Crane leaned back. And have you? Every time I speak, someone tries to burn what I stand for. And every time, he added, voice steady, more people light their own flames. That single answer rippled across platforms. Within hours, the quote was turned into graffiti, t-shirts, even protest chants. A symbol only matters if it survives fire. Netanyahu's office, meanwhile, issued a rare statement. Leadership requires maturity. Some prefer performance. Israel continues to stand for responsibility. But even Israeli newspapers acknowledged a shift. Traoré wasn't going away. He was growing. In a private think tank memo leaked weeks later, one line stood out. We miscalculated. Trayor is not seeking approval. He is revealing our architecture. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré walked the dusty roads of a village recently connected to solar power, part of a Pan-African initiative he had quietly launched. A little girl, barefoot and beaming, ran up to him. Mama says you're not afraid of the big men. Trayor knelt and whispered back. Tell Mama, I'm only big when you believe you are too. It was supposed to stay hidden, a declassified memo buried deep in a European intelligence archive. But someone leaked it, titled, A Project to Contain Emerging Influence in the Sahel. It detailed coordinated efforts by several Western powers to monitor, discredit, and, if necessary, politically isolate Ibrahim Trayor. The language was clinical. Neutralize messaging impact. Restrict diplomatic amplification. Engage proxies to challenge legitimacy. It was a bombshell. Within 48 hours, media outlets from Nairobi to New York picked it up. Hashtags trended globally. Even leaders who had previously remained neutral condemned what they now called neo-colonial surveillance. Netanyahu, though not named directly, was implicated through diplomatic cables referenced in the annex. He called an emergency press conference. There are always efforts to manage global narratives, he said. But conspiracy theories about silencing African voices are dangerous and irresponsible. But the damage was done. That same night, Traoré gave a speech from Ouagadougou's Independence Square. Not from a balcony, but from street level among the people. He wore no suit, just a simple linen shirt and leather sandals. Today, he said, you've seen proof. They fear not our weapons, but our words. Not our soldiers, but our students. The crowd erupted. We were once told our history began with their arrival. Now they panic because we're writing our own chapters. He looked directly into the cameras. To those who tried to erase us quietly, your silence is no longer enough. The world is listening now. International media couldn't ignore it. CNN aired the full speech uninterrupted. The BBC offered simultaneous translation. Even Al Jazeera ran a prime-time feature. The soft revolution. How Traoré is rewriting power. Netanyahu, watching from a secure location, muttered under his breath. We created this. Every time we dismissed him, we built him. His chief aide asked, do we respond again? No, Netanyahu said bitterly. At this point, anything we say only echoes him louder. 6 months later, at the African Continental Forum in Dar, the room rose in applause before Ibrahim Trayor even spoke. He stood not as a rebel or a provocateur, but as something more unsettling to his critics, a consistent leader. The stage bore a simple inscription behind him, no throne, just soil. He approached the podium slowly, letting the silence breathe. Then we were once called just a symbol of resistance, of provocation, of chaos even. And yet here we stand, not burned, not buried, but blooming. His voice was firm but warm. They tried to make symbols our cage. But symbols, when chosen, can also be a sword. He gestured gently to the audience. You are not here to cheer a man. You are here to witness yourselves. All of this, was built not with money, not with permission, but with belief. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu watched from a quiet office. The screen showed Trayor surrounded by a sea of African, South American, and Southeast Asian leaders, many of whom had once been considered peripheral, now standing at the center of global conversation. A staffer whispered, he just signed a coalition trade agreement with Brazil, Indonesia, and Egypt. Netanyahu didn't respond. He stared at the screen, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. Then finally, almost to himself, I told him he was just a symbol. A pause. But I never asked what he symbolized. Back in the car, Traoré stepped off stage. A young journalist rushed to him, breathless. President Trayor, what would you say to Netanyahu now if you had the chance? Trayor turned, smiled softly, and said, nothing. He already heard me. The world did too. He walked away, not with guards, not with an entourage, but through the crowd, handshakes and eye contact at every step. And above the forum entrance, a new banner had been raised, a symbol they couldn't destroy. And so, what began as a dismissive jab, you're just a symbol, became the fire that lit a movement. Ibrahim Trayor never shouted. He didn't need to. His calm became louder than fury. His restraint, more disruptive than rage. While some leaders flexed power, he wielded presence. And the man who was once underestimated by presidents, prime ministers, and power brokers stood not as a reaction, but as a new direction. A reminder to the world that dignity doesn't ask for permission. And symbols, sometimes they survive the fire.